September, we will be meeting at Selby Gardens. I don't know the specific date, but the third Monday of the month in September 2023, we'll be at Selby Gardens in the activities room where we've met before. There is plenty of parking. There'll be a host there from Selby to let us in, so it shouldn't be a problem getting in there at all. They are under construction with the new facility down there, but we should be fine getting in there. Our field trip this month is the yard tour in Palmetto and Bradenton. So everybody sign up there. If you haven't signed up, go to our website or look at the, go to the newsletter, spells it out there. And once you sign up, you'll get the addresses of where to go for the meetings. And they're from 9 to 1 o'clock on this Saturday. Does I don't know if anybody else has any announcements that anybody wants to say. If you do, raise your hand and Allison can unmute you, I guess. So if not, we can get right into the meeting tonight, and I'm gonna turn it over to Rachel, and she's gonna introduce our speaker tonight. So Rachel, take it away.
Thank you, Tom. And in the chat, I also put the web link for any of you who have not registered for Saturday garden tours. Just click that and that'll take you to the right place to register. We will be sending an email with all the details, probably Wednesday, Thursday at the very latest. And we're also on social media, so I'm going to put that in the chat as well for anyone who wants to find us on Facebook, Instagram, and I just started our TikTok account. And I'd like to introduce Lee. Lee is Land Stewardship Manager and Staff Biologist at the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast. He specializes in native plants and conservation and is responsible for parks and preserve stewardship, map making, and geographic analysis, and he also assists with the acquisition of new preserves. Lee is especially interested in methods to attract wildlife with native plants at home, on the farm, or in the woods, and wants to help landowners of all types find creative ways to enjoy their unique slice of Florida. Lee earned his BA degree in biology from Tennessee Wesleyan College. And as a native Floridian, he enjoys exploring the state with his tent in tow and sharing his love of Florida with others. Go ahead, Lee, we're excited to have you.
Well, thank you. That was all fairly accurate. I think I wrote it, so that makes sense. It's good to see some familiar faces and be connecting with the native plant group. I think it's been a while for me since I last joined you all. But it's good to see you. It's good to be back. And today I'm going to be talking about land conservation. I hope I can be invited back to talk more about where my heart is, which is getting into some of the details of native plants and especially wildland restoration. And we're doing a lot of restoration on our preserves, especially in the Myakka River watershed, right on the Myakka River. Love to talk to you about that, and love to talk about maybe some of the gardening that I do at home. Have been really enjoying, gardening for native bees, bumblebees, mason bees, oil digger bees. We got a lot of cool bees in Florida. So I hope we can talk about that sometime. But tonight is, I thought I would talk about land conservation, because I think that's a fundamental concept for our area and fundamental to our mission at Conservation Foundation. So I'm going to share my screen, and just as a bit of housekeeping, I do actually want to pause maybe somewhere midway to allow for some questions. Is that okay, Allison? Or yeah, okay. So I'm going to share my screen and my PowerPoint. Let's go to the beginning. There we go. Can I just get a nod from somebody that you can see my PowerPoint? Great. Okay, so hello, everyone, again. We're going to talk about land conservation in our area, the mission of Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast, who we are, what we do, how we do it, and how you might get involved with our mission. Our mission is to save land and water in Southwest Florida for the benefit of people and nature. And you'll see all throughout our materials this connection between people and nature. And we don't put people above nature or nature above people. This is really important for both of these to thrive if we want a future, a sustainable future, and a vibrant future in our community. So when we talk about land conservation, it's about several things or many things. You'll see our work touching upon obviously wildlife and habitat, but you'll also see things about the economy, working lands, ranch lands, recreational areas. So when we talk about land conservation, don't picture it just as a narrow thing, you know, a narrow one size fits all or one kind of park or preserve. It's many types, and we'll talk about some examples tonight. So a land trust, if you don't know, we are a land trust, and a land trust is a not-for-profit land conservancy that works with the community to conserve land. And we also do a lot of land stewardship. Oh. Our mission to save land brings us to 5 counties in Southwest Florida. Are you able to see my mouse cursor if I point around? That's great. Okay, so this is a view of Southwest Florida showing our service area. We work from Manatee County in the north all the way to Collier County down south. And then we're also starting to work in Hardee and DeSoto counties a little bit. We have 4 focus priorities in our organization. These priorities are waterfront, imperiled wildlife, connectivity, and public access. So waterfront, you can think of as both saltwater and freshwater. We know that if we want to have a clean Gulf and clean bays, we have to protect areas along rivers and streams, which are feeding our estuaries, feeding the saltwater environments. Imperiled wildlife, I think that should be self-explanatory. Connectivity refers to connectivity for both people and wildlife. For wildlife, we're thinking of especially large mammals, you know, megafauna, the Florida panther, the Florida black bear. These species need to traverse the landscape over large areas, and they have to be able to do that without running into highways or, you know, communities. And unique public access, we put the word unique in here because we're not the Parks Department. We don't receive tax dollars, and we can't afford to do public access at the scale or regularity or in the way that the Public Parks Department does. We're looking for ways where we can provide some value added. What is something unique we can bring to the table? Maybe it's difficult for the park system to provide, but we can provide that. So we don't want to duplicate, we want to add value. Over the years, we've managed to save 56 different properties totaling over 19,000 acres. You can see the numbers on this map at the right. These are all places that we've conserved. You'll see a lot of activity in Sarasota County. That's where we were founded. We were a land acquisition agent for Sarasota County for several years. And there's just been a lot of work because of that history in Sarasota County. We're also doing a fair amount in Manatee County, very little in Charlotte County, and not a whole lot in Lee County and Collier. And this has to do with the history of the organization and our growth over time. So over time, we want to do more in these communities, but we started in Sarasota and we're working outward. So I want to talk about some specific examples of land conservation and start to paint a picture of the variety of different types of conservation in our area. The first thing I want to share is about landscape conservation. And this map here is showing, let me back up here, is showing the upper part of the Myakka River watershed here, which is, if we look here, this is Myakka River State Park, Carlton Reserve. Up here is Dew Wet Preserve. And this map is showing this area in between, Myakka River State Park. This is Flatford Swamp owned by Swift Mud. So we're going to zoom into that area. In a little bit, we're going to zoom into this area down south, which is Orange Hammock Ranch. So we have been working over the past several years in this area between Myakka River State Park and Flatford Swamp. This area in Manatee County remains largely unprotected. It's not like to the south in Sarasota County where there's been the wild and scenic Myakka River protection, state statute. There's been public funding directed towards conservation. There's been not as much conservation here in Manatee County. It's remained at risk. This is true also for this area called the Tatum Sawgrass Marsh, which is a wetland featured 3 times the size of Lake Myakka. So a huge wetland on the Myakka River. And the Myakka River is really unique in this area because it has these huge, in-stream wetlands, floodplain marshes, and floodplain forests. Very different than if you look at the Peace River, let's say, which has really incised banks and it doesn't have as many connected marshes and wetlands. So Tatum Sawgrass Marsh, 3 times the size of Lake Myakka, hadn't been protected, was ditched and diked in the 70s and really messed up from a wildlife hydrology ecology perspective. They did that for farming. It actually didn't work out real well for farming. Some parts of it were farmed more successfully than others. Fast forward to today, and we've been working to conserve this feature and help restore this area. So everything you see in yellow on this map are properties that we have conserved. And this little blue triangle we've also conserved. Each of these is a different story with a different partner and a different funding mechanism, different landowners. It's happened over several years. And so it's really a patchwork that's happening over time, and we have to put all these puzzle pieces together. So I'll just briefly point out some of these partners. Triangle Ranch came first. This is a concert, and I'm going to use the word conservation easement a couple times. I will explain conservation easements a little bit down the road. But Triangle Ranch is a conservation easement that's now held by Southwest Florida Water Management District. This Murphy Marsh property, so Triangle Ranch is 1,200 acres to give you a sense of scale. Murphy Marsh is about 500 acres. That's an easement, conservation easement held by the USDA. We have a property here, the Upper Myakka Preserve. This was donated to us by the Myakka Conservancy. And that was purchased by them through a North Americans Wetlands Conservation Act grant. It's like a federal program for wetlands conservation. We have a cluster of properties here right next to Old Myakka Preserve, which I'm especially proud of. We did this in 3 parts. 1, 2, so these are 2 40-acre parcels and then a 200 and something acre parcel. We did over a couple of successive years. This all right here, about 300 acres now is owned by Sarasota County and is part of Old Myakka Preserve. They're in the process of developing their management plan, so the access hasn't really changed to the outside observer. I think technically you can walk into here if you go through the old, access point to the north, and you can find your way through, but I don't think it's signed yet or posted. They will be having more access, but they're in that process of hearing public comment and developing their plan. But I just love this area of Old Myakka. What a treasure, it still has, working farms, really all through here, working farms, families still living on the land, a lot of great wildlife. You come here, you see the crested caracara, the fox squirrels still out on the landscapes, enjoying the longleaf pines out there. And here in Old Myakka Preserve in the addition, we have scrub habitat, and hope that with restoration over time, we can get scrub jays back in this pocket here. We also have a conservation easement on a parcel here, also donated to us by the Myakka Conservancy. And then we purchased this land up in Flatford Swamp, 432 acre preserve that we own and we manage, which we now call Myakka Headwaters Preserve. We've been doing a lot of restoration out here, and we're going to do even more over the years to come. You're invited on Saturday. If you go to our website, we have like an open house, which you can sign up for on our website and tour the property. We're serving lunch. Great time to get out there and see everything we're doing. So you'll notice on this map, we've got a couple properties we own. We own this property. We own this property. Several that were partnerships. We worked with different government agencies, different landowners. This property here is a private property that we hold the conservation easement to, and we monitor and enforce that easement. So this is just a view of this landscape, this area of the Myakka River in Manatee County, and starts to paint a picture of what goes into land conservation at a landscape scale. And when I say landscape, we're talking, over large areas. It's really a puzzle that we have to piece together over many years. You can see how we're doing that to preserve the Tatum Sawgrass Marsh, and we're working upstream. We hope to be able to connect up to Flatford Swamp and beyond to Duet Preserve. This is a really important area. On the south side of the Myakka lands, here's the state park. Carlton is Orange Hammock Ranch, and this is a property that we helped acquire. We negotiated and partnered with the state of Florida. This is now owned by state of Florida, managed by the FWC program, so it's now a wildlife management area, so open to hunting and other recreation. They have a website. You can go on there and see the trails and visit. It's about 6,000 acres, $21 million purchase. 19.5 of that came from the Florida Forever program. That's a really important program. Please ask me about it if you want to learn more about it. It's the number one way that conservation happens in the state. We also fundraised $1.5 million from the community towards this purchase price. And this was a really interesting project because the state of Florida for many years had been saying, well, we're not going to pay full market value or fair market value for properties. We can only provide as much as 90%. And you can imagine for a landowner, they don't really want to take a $1 million or $1.5 million haircut. Why would they do that? And it was killing a lot of conservation deals. It was really unfortunate. We managed to talk with our partners at the state, and we offered that we could fundraise a difference if they would allow us to put in the difference. They did agree to it. We did fundraise the difference, and ultimately it came together. Everybody was really happy with this outcome because this is a tremendous property right next to the RV Griffin Reserve. This is where the reservoir is located on the Peace River, and much of our drinking water is coming from this Peace River and this reservoir. So this property is in the, I forget what they call it, but if the reservoir berm breaks, it will flood an area. It's some kind of critical hazard area. There's a word for that. And the Orange Hammock Ranch is within that hazard area. So important to protect that so that we're not flooding homes in the case of a disaster. It's also the watershed for the Snover Waterway, which flows down into Cocoplum. I'm not saying that right. Snover waterway flows into the Myakkahatchee Creek, which right where this triangle is where the city of Northport is pulling their municipal drinking water from. So it's important on these two fronts for drinking water. Many people don't realize that a lot of our drinking water in Southwest Florida is coming from surface water. So other areas of the states, they're tapping down in the aquifer and they can pull water out of there. And, it's filtered by a lot of, sand over top of the aquifer. We don't have that filtration or that luxury in Southwest Florida. We're drinking right from the surface. And so the quality of that water is dependent on the quality of the land or the landscape around that. Do we want that landscape to be green and naturally deliver clean water, or is it developed and potentially picking up pollutants along the way? So in this area, we're doing a pretty good job. Other areas are still at risk. Ultimately, landscape conservation in Southwest Florida, we're starting to talk about in terms of a wildlife corridor. So you've probably heard of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. This map is showing prioritization of conservation areas according to the CLIP data, which is Critical Lands Identification Project. It's a statewide database, looks at a variety of factors to analyze, prioritize desirability for conservation. In this map, the dark green are the highest priority for conservation, and that trails down to, white is not a priority according to this methodology. So from the Everglades, you can see this is such a critical corridor along the center of the state. And we're looking at ways to preserve land so that wildlife like the Florida panther would be able to connect over to our lands in Myakka and Duet. So here's that area between Flatford and Myakka River State Park we looked at earlier. Here is Orange Hammock Ranch. So how could a panther come over here? It's not an easy answer. This is a difficult landscape. Panthers will have a tough time. And we may fall short of the mark, but I think it's important that we try to figure that out and do our best. And along the way, because of the way we do prioritization, you can imagine we're going to preserve many really important things: working ranches, habitat for wildlife, all these water quality resources, even if the Florida panther can't make it here. These corridors and these areas are important outside of the panther. So that's what I want to say about landscape conservation. I want to open the floor for questions about that before moving on to some other conservation topics. Any questions?
People could go ahead and unmute themselves and speak instead of having to type if they would like, since Lee is giving us this break.
It enables me to drink as well.
You said to go ahead and ask you about that Florida Forever program. So would this be a good time to ask you that?
Sure. Sure. So what I'd like to say about the Florida Forever program, the program exists, it's in place. It's been going on for decades, and it's very effective. What changes year over year is the amount of funding that the governor and legislature appropriates to the program. So that'll go up and down. It took a really hard nosedive during the recession, and it's been slow to return. You'll remember the 2014, I think it was, constitutional amendment, which voters did pass by a 75% margin. And that didn't fund the program like some people had hoped it would. It also funded a lot of land management and moved budgets around. So so more of land management dollars that came from the general fund are now paid by the Florida Forever sort of trust fund. So it didn't move the needle on Florida Forever like some people imagined it might. And there's still these conversations about annual appropriations. So, I think it's important that we communicate with our elected representatives and let them know what our priorities are. Maybe they are hearing from other constituents, and so they have to balance that out. But if you think Florida Forever is a priority, I encourage you to speak up about it. And if you get our e-blasts, our emails, you'll at times hear from us, hey, they're discussing this right now. Call your representative. They need to hear from the community. Yeah. Florida Forever. Another related program is called the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. This comes from the similar funding source, but it's like a separate program. That's a really good program as well. Florida Forever is geared towards more pristine lands, environmentally pristine lands. The rural and working family, I'm saying it wrong. Rural and Family Lands Protection Program is geared more towards working lands. So ranch lands, for instance, would also include citrus and maybe some other agriculture. These landscapes are also very biodiverse, important for drinking water, but have these other benefits of supporting families, the economy, protecting our rural heritage. They're both really important. If anyone wants to talk more about how, when we look at the landscape, it's just not, we can't just save pristine areas. We're going to have a mosaic of different land uses, and we want to preserve these different uses, different mechanisms, different partnerships, different outcomes, but we need to preserve a variety of things if we want this landscape, this corridor to work. The state cannot own this many acres and miles. That's not realistic by any means. It would cost too much to acquire, too much to manage. It's much better for it to remain, for many of these areas to remain private, working lands protected by conservation easements. And that's where Rural Family Lands Program comes from. So we'll talk about easements here in a little bit.
And also in the chat, Lee, I don't know if you've seen that, but Julie Morris asked, why not a corridor through Babcock to Griffin and Orange Hammock? Yeah,
that's a good question. And there was a recent least cost path analysis for the Florida Panther that was published, and it did route Panthers through here. I need to get together with them and understand how they think the Panther is going to get across the Peace River. Yeah. I don't understand. I don't think they will. But maybe there's something I don't understand, in which case, I'll talk more about that when I learn that, but I don't see the connection there. So obviously this is very connected, and this is going to be very important for Babcock Webb to be connected with these areas in the middle of the state. But I don't know how they get from here to here. And this is urbanizing a lot, and we've analyzed this area, and it doesn't seem as viable to me. So I don't know if that makes sense, Julie, but I'm definitely would welcome any kind of feedback on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
I know you said that you are working kind of outward from Sarasota. Have you had any talk about going up into southern Hillsborough County?
No, our board has never directed us to do that, and so we have not looked at that.
Mm-hmm.
Just from my own casual observations, it looks like Hillsborough County actually does a lot to preserve different kinds of land under different kinds of program. All over Hillsborough.
Yeah, that's true. There's I don't know, it seems like it might be the same sort of land that you're looking at is up by the Little Manatee River, out in there, not where the people are.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wondered.
Yeah. Yep. And it's kind of like you keep pulling on the thread, or I don't know, you're like, where do we draw the line?
Exactly, yeah.
Some of that's determined by other land trusts. There are 7 accredited land trusts in the state of Florida. Accreditation is a whole other topic, but we're accredited by a national organization that has examined our standards and practices, determined that we follow national standards, and we get audited periodically to make sure that we're all above board. So there's 7 accredited land trusts in the state. We're part of a statewide alliance of Florida land trusts, and our boundaries are in part determined by where other people are operating. So we don't want to be competitors. We want to be supportive. We want to coordinate. And so that's part of the picture as well. I know in the Hillsborough area, there is a Tampa Bay Conservancy.
Mhm.
I'm not very familiar with their activity. There is also a statewide organization called Conservation Florida. I think they work in Hillsborough County. So it's not that, nothing will ever happen there. There are other organizations, but our board hasn't directed us to go there, and so we haven't yet. But it doesn't mean that they might not in the future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Again, along with natural areas or protecting land for nature, we also look at protecting land for people and how these two go together. And in the land trust world, we often will use the phrase community conservation to talk about projects that are more community oriented versus strictly wildlife. This is an example of a community project called Johnson Preserve at Braden River. It is open to the public. You can get to it. It's off of State Road 70 in the Braden Woods community. So this yellow property right here is the Linger Lodge. And there's a trailhead. You can't get to it by, I think that's Linger Lodge Road, right? You can't get to it from there. You can by bike, but there's a trailhead on the other side through this community up here. But this was a really interesting project because the community came to us. They knew that this land was going to be developed, and they really wanted it preserved. They wanted to protect the wildlife habitat, protect the water quality. Braden River, provides drinking water for city of Bradenton. And they wanted this area preserved. They contacted us. We embarked on a fundraising campaign. We ultimately were able to get an option agreement from the developer, funding from Manatee County, $3 million from Manatee County and $1 million from the community. Put that together to purchase this property, which is now owned by Manatee County, managed as a public preserve. It is a natural area, beautiful longleaf pine out here. There's a basin forest up here, some nice mesic hammock along the river. I love getting up into Manatee County. So I'm, born and raised in Venice. And as you go up to Manatee County, it's cool to see these temperate plant species, pick up. And it's just such the word's probably not a thermocline. I don't know. It's like a climate jump up, and you get on the Braden River, and we have a bunch of hickories and cedars. The hickories especially, we just don't see in Sarasota County hardly ever. So this river is really pretty. Tupelo, hickories, cedars, really distinctive, higher bluffs. We see a lot of swallowtail kites over the longleaf pines out here. Beautiful property. There's trails through it. Go check it out. But that was a community project. The community came to us and said, this is what we want. It's such a small place, and it's surrounded by golf course and homes. Like, it wasn't on our radar. We wouldn't know to look here. The community came to us and said, please help us out. What do you think? Another example of community conservation is around the celery fields. This is a really active recreation area right along the interstate. And there's an industrial park here. So a lot of development in the area. But this is a hotspot for birding. It's also an area that Sarasota County uses to capture stormwater and filter it, reduce flooding in these surrounding communities. Great wildlife habitat, great for recreation. Adjacent to these, many of you have probably heard of these quad parcels, which Sarasota County, when they purchased all of this land, they were forced to buy these quads because it was like a whole package. And when they purchased this whole package, it was always their intent to surplus the quads, from day one. However, years down the line, this restoration occurred, all these improvements, and the public spoke out and they said, we really don't want these surplus and developed. And there were a lot of public hearings about this. Ultimately, the Board of County Commissioners voted to put a conservation easement on these 3 parcels. The 4th quad right here, so if I'm not being clear, there's like 4 parcels bisected by 2 roads. So that's what they call them, the quads. This 4th parcel, the county did not put an easement on. They're putting a fire station and other municipal structures on that. But they voted, the Board of County Commissioners voted to put a conservation easement on the quads, which would forever protect them. They're still owned by Sarasota County. The easement's held by Conservation Foundation. We monitor and enforce it. And they also went a step further, creating a management agreement buy-in between Sarasota County and Sarasota Audubon, who has a nature center here at the celery fields. Then Sarasota Audubon made an agreement with Conservation Foundation. We're working together to restore the quad parcels. So the plans for these parcels include this stormwater pond. We're going to beautify that, put more littoral plantings around here, more trees. This southeast quad is going to be reforested completely front to back. I think that's something like 13 acres. The celery fields is all like wetland habitat. We don't have a lot of forest habitat. And, people like forests. Also, birds like forest. So we felt that it would be great to bring a different kind of natural area for both the people and the nature. And that's what that parcel is going to do. Over here on the southwest parcel, it kind of got divided in 2. The county is going to, on the western half, they're working on plans to build a municipal structure of some kind. And on the eastern half, we're going to plant more trees and also have a public recreation space. So bathrooms, a little bit of parking, a field. We're looking at some kind of a natural play area for children. And the idea here with these quads was to step down development intensity from the industrial and highway uses eastward toward the celery fields. So, we have a municipal structures in here, but it becomes more park-like, and then it becomes more all the way natural before getting to the celery fields. And that's buffering it from intense land uses. We also, Conservation Foundation now holds an easement on these 50 acres, which are the view shed from atop this hill at the celery fields. So if you go at the top of the celery fields and you look east, there's a big farm here that we have an easement on, and the easement permanently protects the property and prevents intense development. The landowner, every easement is, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but every easement is negotiated with the landowner. This landowner retains the right to build a single family residence, some barns, and they can farm it with cattle and can recreate out there, but they can't intensely develop it. So, again, community conservation here, you might get the sense with the quads that there were a lot of voices involved. Board of County Commissioners, the public, Sarasota Audubon, Conservation Foundation. And this community picture is more complicated than state of Florida buys 1,000 acres. It's a state park, So that's a little bit about community conservation at the celery fields. also been working at the Bobby Jones Golf Club. This is in within the city of Sarasota. It's over 300 acres of undeveloped land right in the city. Many people don't realize that, municipalities will own land and they're not really preserved. They could be sold at any time, but for community voices. This came up in conversations, and ultimately we worked with the city of Sarasota to put a conservation easement on this property. We hold the conservation easement, monitor and enforce it. It permanently prohibits intensification of this property, prohibits real estate development, like single family uses. But it allows for the kinds of uses that are already there. It allows for the golf course. It also allows for restoration. And over the past couple of years, the city has been restoring a large portion. I know it's something like 100 acres of this property. So they've gone from 45 holes to 27 holes, I think. And they're making a like 100-acre nature park. They've rerouted some of the canals. This is Philippi Creek. There's a couple of Philippi Creek canals that are passing through here. They've rerouted some of those through some wetland features that they created so that the water would be better purified. So it comes in at the top and then goes into some wetlands here before coming back out the bottom and, heading towards the bay. What else do I want to say about Bobby Jones? So not traditional, it's a golf course. They will be, spraying herbicide and planting turf grass, right? However, a lot of value for wildlife still when we compare that against, intense real estate development, the kind of structures you see within the city limits, that's not good wildlife habitat. So a golf course actually has a lot of value for wildlife, and of course the freshwater purification opportunities, and then of course the recreation, right? So previously this golf club was only open to golfers. You had to pay your fee and play golf. Well, with this restoration area, this is actually going to be open as a community park. You don't have to play golf. You can go for a walk. You can walk the dog or ride your bike. And recreate through this area. And there's going to be trails that go through the park that connect to the Legacy Trail. There's also going to be connections with the 17th Street Park, which I believe they are expanding into part of this area to offer more recreational opportunities. So there's a lot going on there. It was a pretty complex project. Again, a lot of community voices. So can I answer any questions about community conservation before moving on? Maybe not? No? Okay, good. Maybe it makes sense. In all of these cases, we as an organization are asking, how do we add value? The government agencies oftentimes are limited by procedures, bureaucracy, and we can a lot of times support their programs. We can work with landowners in ways that the government can't. Landowners don't trust the government, and for good reason. But they'll often trust a not-for-profit quite a bit more. We're more transparent than the government can be at times. We build partnerships with the community, and in this way, we're able to bridge the gap between government programs and private landowners. We often find also that with conservation projects, it's really not a straight road. There's a lot of twists and turns. So we can form a partnership with the landowner and be their partner all through the twists and turns and navigate these processes. And we'll switch between funding programs sometimes. You know, a deal falls apart. It didn't pass the vote at the state level. Well, we have to go this county route. Many times we're putting together funding from a public source and private sources. So we have to work in these creative ways, and these are ways that we're adding value to projects. Again, we're not the state. We don't have public funding. We have private funding, and it's a much smaller level. Where can we fill the gaps and put together land conservation that's really meaningful? And these examples, I hope, illustrate the way that we're working creatively across the landscape and with different partners. So some of the tools and strategies that we use that I've mentioned, you may hear the word fee ownership and conservation easements. So I want to explain that a little bit. You know, you can think of land ownership as a bundle of rights. And I like to use the analogy of like a layered cake. Okay, and so in this layered cake, most of us, when we own property, we own the full cake and all the layers. But at times there may be things that happen to this cake where some rights have been cordoned off and given to someone else. So you can imagine slicing the cake vertically. Well, let me do horizontally first. So sometimes mineral rights are sold off, and that's the bottom layer of the cake. That might be severed from a property. You only own the top couple layers. Sometimes there are surface layers that have been severed and given to someone else. So you might have an access easement across your property owned by an adjacent landowner. You can think of utility easements, you know, gas and power lines. Many of us have power lines, you know, through our property. And so there's a little strip of that cake where the surface rights were kind of given to someone else. But by and large, when you own the whole cake, well, I guess in the vertical slices, you can imagine you can have joint ownership among multiple parties. They could be undivided interest or divided interest. So you can cut that cake up vertically. But usually when we talk about fee ownership, we're talking about owning the whole cake. A conservation easement is a special tool between a conservation entity like a not-for-profit or the government that permanently limits the uses of the land. So like it's kind of like that surface layer of the cake is given to a land trust or to a government agency, and they're kind of making the cake stay in its current state on the surface. I feel like I'm losing track of my cake analogy. I've gone too deep in cake world. So a conservation easement is negotiated with a private landowner, and it's tailored to their needs. Every easement will be different. Now, if you work with like the USDA, their easements are all kind of the same. Conservation Foundation is tailoring easements toward the landowner's needs. And we're typically allowing for a couple of residences and agricultural practices. I'll give an example. The ranches in our area, let's say we did a conservation easement on a 1,200 acre ranch. They reserved the ability to build two residential structures over 1,200 acres. And they can graze cattle. They're not able to timber, they're not able to sod, they're not able to intensify the land use in any way. So they can't convert forests to grazing lands. They can't convert grazing lands to row crops. So it kind of locks it in at its current state. They can build a couple houses, they can recreate, they can hunt. They're allowed to do restoration, but they can't do anything to diminish what are called conservation values. All of those rights get turned over to us for the right to monitor and enforce those terms. And when we hold a conservation easement, that's an obligation and liability in perpetuity. And perpetuity is a really long time. We are forever obligated to monitor and enforce that easement. And for this reason, we have standards and practices all around how we monitor and enforce. We're required to visit annually. We have to do reports. The reports have to be filed and archived offsite, digitally and hard copies. We always fund a stewardship quasi endowment, which for each property when we take on an easement, and those endowments, they spin off interest, and we use those interests to pay salary to monitor and enforce. So there's a lot that goes into it. We also are insured by a land trust legal defense insurance fund. So if we have to go to court, and this has happened a couple times, above our deductible, we have a $5,000 deductible. Above that, our insurance kicks in to defend the easement. And it's really important that we monitor and enforce and defend our easements. You'd be amazed. Things come up, and sometimes it's miscommunications, and sometimes it's more serious than that. But we're in it for the long haul, and that's conservation easements. A couple funding strategies I'll point out. One is fair market value sale. So that's where we get an appraisal. It says it's worth $1 million. It's purchased for $1 million. Bargain sale is a unique thing that a land trust can offer. And this is where there's an appraisal. It says it's worth for $1 million. The landowner sells it for less than fair market value. So let's say $800,000. And the $200,000 difference is considered a charitable gift. And they can seek a tax deduction for that charitable gift. They can also do an outright donation. And what's really attractive about donations for a landowner, aside from that, maybe their heart's in that and they want to provide a legacy. With an outright donation, there's a charitable gift tax incentive. I got to get the words right. It's a tax deduction, I think. I'm not an attorney or an accountant. When someone gives a charitable gift of land, they can seek a tax, they can reduce their taxable income for up to 50% of their AGI and carry that for a period of 15 years, I think, or until they use up the value of that gift. It's a really great charitable tax incentive. Most charitable gifts, you cannot deduct so much from your AGI, and you cannot carry it for so many years forward. So that will often be part of the picture. Like if there's a bargain sale involved, they can seek this charitable deduction. Really applies to some higher income people. Certainly not to me or you. But there's a couple of funding strategies and a little bit about fee and conservation easements. Funding sources. The public funding sources are really important federally. It's coming from a couple of different areas. The USDA is a really important partner for us, which that funding is appropriated through the Farm Bill. There's a land and water conservation fund that I think that comes through offshore drilling leases. Department of Defense, it doesn't really apply so much in our area. This happens a lot in landscapes where there's bombing ranges or other military installments. Doesn't really apply in Southwest Florida, but you get over to Avon Park area, up in the Panhandle, it's more relevant. It can be very relevant. In the state, at the state level, Florida Forever, we talked about, is really important program. And if you were to look at a map at all the Florida Forever projects in our area, there are tons, and we've done tons. I wish I could rattle them off really quickly, but there are many in Sarasota, Manatee County. Rural and family lands we touched on. Florida Wildlife Corridor is a great way to bring awareness to this. And because of that Florida Wildlife Corridor, they've put some words into the state statutes to try to direct more funding towards conservation. County level, Sarasota County has always been a rock star. They've conserved so much land. Manatee County is starting to catch up a little bit. They passed a referendum recently to fund some land conservation at a lower level than Sarasota County. However, I think it'll have a great impact in the community. And they're still working through the process of receiving nominations, vetting them, and moving to contracts, but they are moving forward and looking at a couple of really attractive properties. They have a website for that if you were really keen to learn what properties they're looking at. They have a website where you can look at the maps and see all the details for the properties. When we move out of Sarasota and Manatee counties, it's different in each county. Charlotte County does not have a funding program. Lee County does have a funding program, the Conservation 2020 program, but it has kind of changed over the years, and I have seen less activity there. Of course, DeSoto and Hardy don't have any funding programs. And then, of course, well, I'll say that these public funding programs are especially important with the high price tag of land acquisition in our area. So, land values are very high in Southwest Florida. And, you and I cannot afford $20 million for Orange Hammock Ranch. It's just not going to happen. So the state program is really important at an acquisition level. But we also find that private investment is very important as well. Private investment is what's fueling our programs, over time, is what pays salaries to go out and advocate and put the projects together and work with the landowners. Oftentimes, private investment are what's the difference between, the project happening and not happening, when they bridge that gap between what a public program can put forward and what the appraised value was. And so it's really kind of like a hodgepodge of funding sources that we put together to make land conservation happen. If you want to get involved, which I hope, and really many of you already are, but if you want to help save land, there are some important ways you can do that. You can participate in our programs. We have on our website events posted. We have now a full-time adult education person. We have a full-time youth education person. You'll see on our website lots of events, ways that you can get involved, get out on the land, learn about plants and animals and these things. You can volunteer. We do volunteer in different ways. If you're an office person, we have office work. If you're out on the land person, we have out on the land work. I don't know, it would be in between, but we could figure that out. Yeah, we love our volunteers. Some of you have been out to our properties to volunteer. We're doing a lot of, so as stewardship manager, I'm more on the land a lot of the times, and we have a goal to plant 10,000 trees this year. We've planted quite a few already. I'm trying to think of how many. A few hundred. But when we get into rainy season, that's when we're going to do thousands. Planting a lot of pop ash in our Myakka wetlands and longleaf pine in our uplands. So we need volunteer help with that. We also need volunteer help in the office too, and I don't want to diminish that. We have volunteers that process trail cam photos, for instance, that help us to know whether we have trespassers or we have wildlife that are important for us to be managing for. Obviously, you can donate, and we encourage everyone to donate. And you can also think about leaving a legacy of land. If you have land, give us a call and we can talk about different ways that can support conservation. And tell your friends. right? So this is a community effort. We're a community supported organization. We want to reach out to as many people as we can. So I think that is the long and short of my presentation about land conservation. Any more questions for me?
Again, I urge people to unmute yourselves and you can make your question verbal rather than type. I see Kathy.
I got a question. Lee, on the conservation easements, you listed a lot of stuff that the owners can and can't do. Can you go in and make any changes or improvements to the land?
Interesting. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Some of our easements, we have reserved the right to do restoration on their property. Triangle Ranch, for instance, there was a third-party right, which is held by Swiftmud, by the way. So Swiftmud holds a third-party right to restore hydrology on the property. Now that's by mutual agreement. So could there be friction? Possibly. They would have to negotiate some specifics. You know, obviously they can't flood somebody's house, right? But they have a third-party right of restoration. We've done that on some other properties. I think possibly at Braden River Preserve, we have third-party rights of restoration. We'll often retain the right to manage invasive plants. We don't want to do that. So we cannot afford to take on people's management responsibilities, right? Private, and also it's important to note, a charitable, a not-for-profit cannot give impermissible private benefit to private individuals, right? So I can't, like if you're giving to your church or whatever organization, you get that letter every year that says, you did not receive goods and services in return for this donation. That's a big no-no. So as a not-for-profit, we can't just like go to your house and mow your lawn for you, right? That's not how it works. So we have to be really careful. We can't just be managing private property because that creates a whole IRS problem. Are they donating to us and now we're giving them goods and services? Where's that? It blurs these lines, and it's what's called impermissible private benefit. So we can't do that legally. But the reason we're reserving a right to manage invasive plants, you can imagine a conservation easement, the landowner's not treating climbing fern, right? And you're like, really, guy, you need, it's just right here, so guess what? I pulled it out by hand. I'm not trying to give you private benefit, but it was really easy for me to pull it out, and I have that right. We could see that escalating. We've never had to go there before where maybe something's getting out of control and we need to step in, but we really want to avoid that. I've never had to go there, but it's something we want to avoid. We want the landowner to be doing that work. And we don't want to have to deal with impermissible private benefit. We don't want to fundraise. How would we fundraise for private property? Like, hey, I need $10,000 so I can go to Tom's house and he's got an invasive problem that I'm going to take care of for him.
Can you suggest that though, that they do their own?
Yeah, so as part of our monitoring and enforcement, we're visiting every year, and what would happen is we say, hey, year one, hey, I noticed you got some Brazilian pepper in the corner there. We carry flagging tape with us. We'll flag it. We'll give them a map. Hey, here's some treatment options. Here's some contractors. So we're like a partner for technical. We can always give technical support. You should take care of that. Year two, hey, I've noticed you've got more. This is kind of a problem. What's going on? What can we do? Did you think about enrolling in the NRCS EQIP program, which can provide cost-share assistance for managing this plant? Here's how we would do that. Here's a management plan from FWC. Year three, okay, why haven't you been listening to us? What's going on? It starts to escalate into what we would start to call a violation of the easement. And then we get into some paperwork. We're sending letters. Maybe we're contacting our attorney. Enforcement procedures are really calibrated to the extent of the problem, right? So it's not like a one size fits all. As we kind of get into this of you haven't been managing, here's a problem, it's getting like a big problem, we're calibrating the response all along the way to try to get the landowner to manage the property. But we do reserve in many cases the ability to kick in some management if we need to. So I know that was a long answer. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Lee. There's a couple of thank yous in the chat, and then from Julie, she asks, does CFGC put a priority on coastal lands that will allow mangroves and marshes to move upslope as sea level rises?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Coastal marsh migration, that's a big subject. So many of you may know we have a problem in our area. As sea levels rise, coastal plants that are found on this coastal area will need to migrate upslope. So they can't be underwater, right? They need to be in their critical zone, whether that's the dune or the mangrove or the high marsh. They need to migrate, but we have development usually at that next elevation. So across the street at the next highest elevation is a house, and the coastal marshes won't be able to migrate. So they call that coastal squeeze. I think they've mapped all this out in the Charlotte Harbor watershed. There's going to be a tremendous loss of coastal natural communities and coastal native plants. We have prioritized it in the past. We mapped out the top 100 priorities in our service area. We mailed to all of these landowners. I think out of the top 100, we ended up with one viable response that was ultimately added to Charlotte Harbor Preserve Buffer State Park. So that was it's on Coral Creek. It's like 50 acres, I think. Beautiful property. But since that time, we haven't looped back to our coastal marsh migration priorities. We may do that. We're kind of this summer looking at, again, another round of prioritization and mailings. So short answer is have done it, haven't maximized it, would like to do more of it. It does get down to funding sources and strategies and staff capacity. So one of the big problems is, how would you fund specifically coastal marsh migration conservation? So we have to probably build it into some kind of, I shouldn't say that. Anyways, you got to figure out the funding program. And then the other problem is, where are the properties? So there's not that many opportunities, but there are some. I think I've rambled, but I hope that was helpful.
Kathy?
I have another, the property you did for us a couple of years ago was the Johnson Preserve at Braden River. And we did it in the fall, and it was a really nice small area that had a lot of fall flowers. So if anyone can get there in the fall, if you remember, it's a nice area to go to. It's quite small and not a long walk, but it's pretty much all in the shade, I believe, too. So
Do you need us to get permission before we plan something for a property? If we wanted to get together and go to one of the properties that you preserve like that, or like Myakka Headwaters?
So it will depend on the property. If it's a public park, obviously not, right? So Johnson Preserve is a public park. If it's a property that we own, generally you will need our permission ahead of time. It's not hard to get. We'll set that up. So Headwaters Preserve, for instance, you would need our permission, and we'll support you in that. It would be a great field trip.
And
Conservation easements are typically private property, and you're not going to be able to go out there.
Right. You mentioned having some land stewardship activities this summer, and there has been some pretty consistent interest in native Serenoa native plant members to have some opportunities to get together over the summer. So if you get in touch with us and give us dates and times, we could actually promote that to our members and potentially come out as a group for something.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, give us some dates, send an email, whatever. I have a-
Okay.
Is there a size limit to some of your properties? I mean, do they range from 2 acres up to 2,000 acres?
They do range in size. Many of our small properties are from earlier in our history. We have learned that it takes the same amount of staff resources and oftentimes more staff resources to monitor and enforce an easement on 1 acre as it does for 1,000 acres. Ultimately, what you're managing is a relationship. It's not about the land, it's about people. So, the best use of our time and resources is to have the biggest impact as possible. So these days, when somebody comes to us with an acre, we usually decline. It's rare that an acre is critical, right? But it does happen if it's an inholding within Carlton Reserve, if it's on Myakka River. You can imagine there are times when size doesn't matter. It's a critical inholding, or it's critical for some reason. But when somebody contacts us, like, I've got an acre, it's in this subdivision, we decline. We don't do beachfront easements anymore. We've got a couple of those that are like an acre or two, but again, it's the same amount of work, and there just isn't the value there relative to what we could get. We're trying to maximize the dollars that we receive.
Mhm. There were a couple more things in the chat. Excellent presentation. I had another one. The Manatee County Environmental Lands Committee is looking for new members right now. If anybody's interested in Manatee County, I'm being on the Environmental Lands Committee, which is looking for land to purchase, environmental lands to purchase. So I think we read the other ones. It was sad to see that they knocked down a lot of big trees at Bobby Jones Golf Course. Wondering why they had to do that, and you might have a better answer than I would have, Lee, on that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of which trees they knocked down or how many that was. I can just tell you from the perspective of Conservation Foundation, the easement terms, what they say is that they have full latitude to knock down trees and move dirt around. That's the terms of our easement. So when I monitor and enforce this, that is permitted per the terms of the easement. So we're kind of have to look at, every easement is different as to how fine scale or how specific it is. This was a more broad scale easement that allows for golf courses. It's our only golf course easement, but it does allow this activity. So it is permitted activity. The other perspective I would add is I feel really good about the restoration they're doing. So a lot of water quality restoration, enhancement is probably the better word. Planting a lot of trees in this park area, which they haven't done yet, but that's down the road. It's in their plan for this nature park to plant a lot of trees. I think on balance, we're going to end up with a lot more habitat. So you probably know old trees have a lot of structure that young trees don't. So old trees are fundamentally different than young trees. I don't want to say that a newly planted tree replaces an old tree. They're not one-to-one. But if I'm being like generous with my views, I'm like, they're actually going to plant a lot of trees, way more than the number that they took out. So I think on balance, we're ending up in a better place. As far as the specific trees, they had to lay out the golf course in a specific way. Like golf courses are really specific. It's just, I know that they did their best to preserve as many as they could, but ultimately with the realignment, so they realigned everything. They went from 45 holes to 27. So they had to realign and it had to blow out some trees. So that probably doesn't reduce the sting, but that's a couple of thoughts on it.
Well, very good. Anybody else have any more questions? That's all that's in the chat, I believe. Very good.
I
Well,
just had a quick one. You spoke really briefly about upcoming parkland in Sarasota County and that being available on a website. Where specifically would we find that information if we wanted to learn more?
I'm trying to think, is that the area in Old Mayaca, the Old Mayaca Preserve?
Oh, and I might have misunderstood you. It sounded like there was a website for upcoming park, like development or purchases or lands that are, Allison's shaking her head no, so maybe I misunderstood.
Maybe was it Manatee County acquisition priorities?
I'm asking for Sarasota.
I'm not sure what that would be, so yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna keep trying to find out. There's a couple of pieces of land I'm watching, and I have no idea if they're becoming parks or not.
Okay, well, what I can say though is the relevant program is the Environmentally Sensitive Lands Protection Program,
Okay,
ESLP, ESLPP for short.
yeah.
You
I'm
know,
familiar.
Google ESLP, you can go to their website, you'll see staff contacts. You could contact staff directly.
Okay.
I don't know if the website has their acquisition like priorities, but you could probably get a hold of that. It's public record.
Okay,
So you could ask the staff for it. If a property is not on that list and they're not pursuing it, they have a nomination form you can fill out. And
okay,
go ahead and do it. Why not?
awesome.
it's
That's what I needed to know. Thank you very much.
I actually found that there's two through it's at scgov.net. I just Googled just what Lee told us to, ESLPP, Sarasota County, and there are two links, one to the Land Acquisition Program and then the Oversight Committee. So yeah, it's probably just what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm so glad your Googling went much better than mine did. Could you please share those links in the chat so that I have them also?
I'm not sure I can. I did it on my phone. Let me see if
Oh,
I can.
no. Okay.
well, great presentation, Lee.
Yeah, let me just again wrap up by saying I really appreciate everyone here. I know that your heart is along with mine in saving these lands and saving these plants and animals. You know, it's good to see a lot of you. I hope we can connect out on the land. I hope we can do great things for the Florida environment.
Great. We're much needed. As much development is happening all across our state. Every little piece of land that we can help preserve for the trees and the plants and the wildlife that use them is definitely worth it. Very good.
Comes one into the chat, which you'll want to grab, and then I'll try for the other one. I figured out a way to do it. So,
Allison, our Zoom guru.
well, I'm just persistent with technology. We'll just say that. Not always a guru, just persistent.
Well, look forward to seeing everybody in September. Well, hopefully before we can get out on some hikes. We're trying to organize a couple hikes, so stay tuned for a newsletter or just awareness of a hike that we might possibly be able to do during the summer, or Lee might get us out on some of his properties out there. So that would be great. But if not, we'll see everybody after our break in September.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, Lee.
I'm sorry to screw up that very good ending, but I had a personal plug I just wanted to throw out there. It's a total sidebar native plant thing. I recently found a partridge pea variety in the wild that, wild. It was in a vacant lot, but it's completely recumbent. It lies completely flat. And partridge pea does this sometimes, but I'm telling you, this variety is 100% recumbent. So I'm starting to propagate it because I think it'd have a lot of value. Because you could mow over this. If that triggers any like enthusiasm for anyone, give me a shout. I'm trying to figure out what to do with this because it seems like such a powerful variety. So I welcome emails about that.
Yeah, talk to Bruce Holtz at Selby, or Don Patton too, you know, that's doing the what is it, the
Ecoflora.
Ecoflora. I mean, they'd definitely be interested in that. I mean, you might get a new variety named after you, Lee.
And I just want to put in a plug for Lee's stewardship days, because, you know, for maybe an hour of work party, then we might have some walk time as well alongside the river or something like that. There's some really nice access to property, and doing the work, he provided all the tools and all the plants, and, you know, planting native plants for an hour isn't such a bad thing to do.
No,
So
goes fast. An hour goes fast.
an hour goes
And
very
just
fast.
in that land of Florida native plant propagation, I would be interested in seeds and starts for students next year. If anyone is in that realm, we can absolutely use that within Sarasota County Schools. So I have students who are interested in things like that. Please keep me in mind.
Hey, can you email me?
Absolutely. I already have about your internships. I'll reconnect with you though.
Lee, why don't you put your email in the chat?
Will
Yeah.
do.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, you're the same person I've been talking with. Okay. Okay. Okay.
All
Thank you.
right. Well, thank everybody for coming. Enjoy
Great,
your summer.
thanks.
See you soon.
It was super and good.
Thanks a lot, Lee, Allison, everybody.
Good night. I'm going to end the meeting for everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.